Now we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty of what Indians are all about.
I still say we Indian people are believers in the truth. This is the way of life that was given to your people. You're born an Indian, you're going to die an Indian. Indianness is a good life. You're facing an Indian this afternoon.
Good afternoon. The Muskogee Creek Nation National Council recently introduced a bill to return Muskogee Media to an independent status. The Principal Chief, James Floyd, has vetoed that bill. We now have interviews for you with Principal Chief James Floyd and Representative Travis Scott talking about the recent veto of that bill. On January 4th, Muskogee Creek Nation Principal Chief James Floyd vetoed a bill that would reinstate Muskogee Media as an independent statutory executive agency. This places Muskogee Media under the direct control of the Office of the Principal Chief. In a statement posted to the MCN Public Relations Facebook page, the administration outlined the rationale for the veto. Muskogee Media spoke with Principal Chief James Floyd about his decision to veto the legislation. Chief, in your objections, you stated that only 7 of the 18 positions are dedicated to news reporting at Muskogee Media. The remaining 11 positions consist of administrative and technical support staff, a graphic design division that generates revenue and lays out the newspaper, and ad sales associates that generate revenue for the department. All of these employees are Native American citizens, with only 2 being non-Creek. What would your plan be for the remaining 11 positions? They may be worried about being fired, laid off, liquidated, any of that. What is your plan for those remaining 11 positions?
Well, several things are going on regarding other than the news media part of Muskogee Media. We have a need for graphics, design, and printing reproduction within the tribe. We have 2 other departments that I guess have small ventures into that area. What I've asked staff to look at is if we co-located them somewhere, could we gain a better efficiency, keep everybody employed, and provide the products and services that people need.
In other words, making it in another department of its own, or putting it in
We're looking at the possibility of having a department that would serve the nation, like in public relations, in tourism, recreation, the other needs of departments of the tribe that needs printing, production, graphics, design work. And so it would be combined and include those employees.
Another objection that you outlined in your message was that you had a wish that Muskogee Media be submitting quarterly reports to the executive branch. Have you ever received a quarterly report from Muskogee Media?
In, I think, the last year, upon request, I think we've received, there's been 2 to 3 that have been submitted. They go into the quarterly report that the Principal Chief presents to the National Council. The issue that we have, and the issue that I'd raised with the council, is that as an independent agency, other independent agencies come and present to the National Council because there's a shared oversight by the National Council and the Principal Chief with independent agencies. We've not had that with Muskogee Media. I feel it needs to be there. Just as we previously discussed, the graphics design, kind of the quasi-business venture, was something that we really weren't aware of. And those types of things, I think it could do better if we had oversight over it, or at least discussed how it could grow. And we just have not had that discussion.
Were there any meetings with you and your office specifically with former leadership at Muskogee Media, and I'm talking about Sterling Cosper, as far as some of these financial oversight concerns that you had? Did you guys have any kind of talks or dialogue about any of those concerns that you had with him?
Other than short conversations or emails, no, we didn't.
Okay. Another objection that you outlined in there, and in your message, I think there was a typo because it referenced NCA 18-180 when I believe it was when it was meant to reference NCA 18-184 was actually what you were vetoing. But it said that it would return financial oversight to a single individual, the Muskogee Media Manager. In the original wording of the bill, it created the hierarchy, of course, of the editorial board. And that editorial board would have oversight of the Muskogee Media Manager, and that would include the budget. In addition, Muskogee Media also goes through the annual budget hearings with the National Council and justifies the budget, everything like that. Apart from the already established legislative and executive review of the budget, which takes place, as I said, every year with the council, what additional oversight do you want to propose? And I think you kind of answered that a little bit in the previous question with our follow-up, but what do you think further needs to be done other than just that yearly budget justification, just like any other department? In other words, Muskogee Media goes through a budget justification and a budget hearing just like any other department. Why would the news agency need to have more oversight?
Well, in the original legislation from 2015, the editorial board was given the managerial responsibility. After the original bill was rescinded, we talked to attorneys and other journalism experts who felt that the editorial board should deal with the news content decision making of the news media portion. That the daily management really shouldn't be a responsibility of an editorial board. The editorial board should be answering the questions of, does this meet the standards of the national journalism standards and other questions that arise in the publication of papers and in video. So in the substitute bill that I had sent over to the council, I broke those two off because we still have a need for oversight. We established Muskogee Media as an independent agency with an editorial board with the exclusive responsibility of working with the staff and looking and assisting with the questions that arise with news reporting. The resource committee would look at the business side of Muskogee Media, and on a quarterly basis, as an independent agency, they would appear before the National Council, as does about every other independent agency. And I feel that is the proper oversight that we have. It's a joint responsibility between me and the National Council, and we just want to make sure that oversight is there, that they have an opportunity to come and report, just as other independents do, to tell us how things are going, what needs they have, issues they may have. We haven't had that dialogue in the past.
Another objection, and it dealt with the editorial board specifically and who sits on it, that you had, is it doesn't address the possibility of there being no enrolled Muskogee Creek citizens being both available and meeting the specific requirements to serve on the editorial board. That was word for word from your objection. Board requirements, as previously established, allows for 2 MCN citizens and 1 non-citizen. Is your plan to increase the number of board seats available to non-citizens? Or in other words, do you have any concerns that possibly creating a board, this would create a board where non-citizens outnumber MCN citizens?
The intent of the editorial board and its membership has gone through several iterations. At one point, we're looking at just open to people in the state of Oklahoma, but in talking again to legal experts and journalism experts, it's going to be hard to do that. And so we expanded that to be Creek citizens, at least 2, and then opened that up and dropped the restriction that they must reside within the state of Oklahoma. We'd desire that they do, because I think the involvement would be better, but understanding the reality, we may have to go beyond the state.
You don't have any fear that would compromise the board with more non-citizens?
No, I think the other thing that needs to be corrected is that we didn't have staggered positions in the past, and even if the bill had remained the law had remained in place, all 3 of the original editorial board members would have had to leave this month according to the original legislation. So we would be without today if we were sitting here and the law was still in place.
Chief, in previous coverage and in a memo that you released to the citizens, you expressed a trust in the National Council's decision regarding this specific matter. Now you're vetoing a majority decision from the council involving this matter. I wonder if you can explain why.
Well, the main thing that arose during the last, I think, December legislation was the council felt they didn't have time to look at the substitute that I had sent over. I've had discussions with the National Council members since then, and so there's validity in the substitute bill. They'd like to take that up, but the fact that they passed and restored a bill that wasn't workable resulted in me providing a return of that legislation to them. And I still feel optimistic that we can arrive at something that's going to be suitable for everyone. Because I think at the end of the day, we still have the same objectives. We still want to provide good communication to our citizens and the public. But we want to make sure that we're being good stewards of tribal money, because we have more than $1.5 million annually going in there, and that's significant because there's always a tension of where money's going and what it's being used for. So we want to make sure that we assure everybody that we're doing a good job with the resources that we have. And so I think there are general agreement on the substitute bill, and so what I'm looking forward to is to go and make the final adjustments that we need to and work with the council and get something passed. I still remain committed to open and independent media, and as in the letter I sent the other day, I've not been involved in any decision making on any story at any time since the bill has changed, and I don't plan to. I want it to remain independent. I want them to use the judgment that they have in putting out news to our citizens. I just want to make sure that we have an accountable framework, and that's it. And I think we can get there. I think we can have something everybody be proud of. And we've had the time to look at other newspapers and media products from other tribes. We're looking at trying to pick from some of the best and bring forward those ideas so that we can expand the offerings that we have to our citizens.
You mentioned speaking with some council members, and this is undoubtedly, and we've seen it, a polarizing issue within the council. There's some that are on one side of it, one other side of it. I wonder if you've talked with the co-sponsors of NCA 18-184, being those wanting to reverse the decision or put forth a new one that would restore free press. Can you talk about if you've had any conversations with those council members, and what have those discussions been like?
Had a conversation with 2 of the 4. I think there's 4 people involved, and they have looked at the substitute bill. They've kind of marked it up with their own thoughts. We just need to get together and again come to a common agreement on the substitute going forward, and I think then we'll have some closure of that. Again, at the end of the day, our objectives are still the same. I think some people have gotten caught up in the narrative that's been going on of, revoking freedom of the speech and free press. We've not done that. And we've put into place a structure that helps solidify that. And in my opinion, and I think it's voiced by a number of the council members, accountability that we're all being called to task for, both me and the National Council members. And so we all feel the same questions. We're just trying to come to a solution that is a better path forward than what we've had in the past.
Chief, the majority of the talks that we've had with you regarding this bill, or that we've seen you release regarding this issue itself, has been about structure, funding, stewards of the money, things like that. However, there has been, and the night of the emergency session, there has been National Council members say there's too much negative press in the paper. We need more positive stories in the paper. Is that something that you agree with, or that you look at as be a reason that would need a change like this? Or do you reject that notion that just because something may be negative, it shouldn't be allowed in the tribal newspaper?
In my personal opinion, whether something's positive or negative doesn't concern me. In this position, it's understood. What concerns me is that it be verifiable, fact-based, truthful. Then it should go out. I mean, at this stage, with me as the principal chief and those council members, if we're so sensitive to something being negative, then we need to recheck our own values. I don't worry about that. That comes with the territory that we have, again. But we need to make sure that what's being reported is being truthful and meets some standards, and we've outlined that in the substitute bill.
All right. Is there anything you'd like to add that I haven't covered so far?
No, I think the one thing that's important, I know that people have said, well, this came so suddenly, but this goes back to the time, even with, you've mentioned the budget discussions, the budget hearings. We had some concerns about the growth of the budget and what the budget consisted of and what the money was going for. I've expressed concerns to the National Council on a couple other issues between that time and the time that the action was taken by the National Council. So, we've had some concerns. Those have been expressed to the National Council. So it may have been a surprise to the public, but within the representatives and myself, we had some concerns that all of them, which I can't go into detail about, that really needed to be addressed. And so I know that things have gone suddenly in the last couple of months, but I think the result is we have a basis for a good media service for the Muskogee Creek Nation going forward.
Oh, and Chief, the one last thing I did want to ask you is that when you said, to this point, the narrative may have been free speech and an end of it and everything like that, and to this point you most certainly have not. We did see a letter to the editor, or basically a letter in the newspaper from current Muskogee media leadership that indicated that there is a process now where stories do go to Secretary McIntosh to verify facts, things like that, everything like that. Was that something that you mandated, or was that something that was brought upon by Secretary McIntosh?
Well, the legislation that was passed in November assigned the Muskogee media to the Department of Commerce, of which Eli McIntosh is the secretary. So it is his responsibility. I think the misnomer is that he's looking over every word and, in looking at every, story that's going out. Even as late as today, when I spoke to him, he's not. We have other things that go on. Muskogee media is one segment of the nation. We have other things going on. He just doesn't have the time, if he desired to do that. The editor of the paper has full responsibility, and I would suggest that if any citizens have any questions, they feel there's any concerns regarding censorship or lack of free speech, to contact the editor of Muskogee Media and talk to her directly.
Muskogee Media also spoke to Travis Scott, MCN National Council representative for Okfuskee District, Seat B, and a co-sponsor of the bill to reinstate free press at MCN.
Jason, the intent of changing the legislation itself, I think, could have had some better parameters before it got to the point where we are now. I didn't like the way it was presented in an emergency extraordinary session at the time, not with the full council being present, also with the sponsor not being there. I didn't feel like it was adequate enough to pursue and make a decision on that piece of legislation at that time. I feel like that there could have been some issues handled differently with the council, the executive branch, with the editorial board, and tried to come to a happy medium with resolving those issues rather than proposing a bill to retro and repeal the way at the point where we are now.
Can you talk about some of the dialogue or conversations that you've had with some of your colleagues that are on the other side of this issue than you are, or the principal chief, and how satisfied you are with the outcome of some of those conversations?
Yes, if you recall in the meeting that evening when the legislation was proposed, I'd asked several questions in regards to the bill being presented, and I'm not comfortable with the answers that was given because it doesn't justify in the bill being repealed and removed to where it is now. I feel like that the not necessarily the opposing voters of the legislation, but if funding was an issue, which that has been expressed many times in conversations. I think back in 2015 when the bill was originally proposed and ratified 14-0, that issue should have been proposed at the time on how we're going to pay for it. And now all of a sudden it is an issue. So it's hard for me to grasp the intent right now of funding being an issue.
Is what you've seen as a substitute bill, and what's been discussed here in work sessions, in reintroductions, things like that, and now a veto. We now look to go to maybe a vote on that veto override or not. Is everything that's been presented, is there anything that's been presented as far as in a substitute bill, in your mind, a greater outcome than just putting it back to what it was before November 8th?
The proposed substitute bill, from what I have seen, adds a extra committee. I feel that adding that extra committee without any jurisdictional or any managerial decision making seems like it. I think some of the issues, there's communication barriers. Like I've said before, we as council members, whether it's the BF&J committee, LNC committee, whatever falls under our jurisdiction, if we have any disputes or any ideas that come to the committee presented to the council or the administration, we address those with those appropriate boards. And then if further steps need to be taken, then we can take them. But I think that's the way that we should work as a nation through those processes, whether they're independent or they're under the legislative branch or the executive branch. Try to mend those fences and try to make those problems solved, worked, rather than just making a hasty decision and trying to do legislation to accommodate our needs immediately.
We spoke with the principal chief, and he indicated that there had been concerns from his office leading up to November 8th when the emergency session did take place. He even said that some of those concerns were related to the council, and there was almost a sense of this was going to come up on November 8th. You as a council member, what was your awareness of this emergency session and really the fact that you all were going to be seeing a repeal of what had previously been the Muskogee Media Free Press Act? What was your prior knowledge of that before that emergency session took place?
You know, I've completed my first full year being back on the council. I was gone for eight years, and when this proposal came up, me personally, I did not have any recollection of any concerns, of anything that was of great magnitude that we needed to address it immediately. Some of my fellow council members had said that, you know, there had been talks in years past, a couple of years ago before I got back on, but nothing was ever done at that time. And so now that it being an election year and this comes about to try to repeal and replace, the perception of it to me is it makes the whole nation not look very good. That's the perception of the citizens as well. From many phone calls, conversations that I've had, there's a lot of concern about what are you trying to hide? What does the nation not want us to know? And like I expressed earlier, we try to give all of the information we can to our individuals at community meetings, whether it's functions, anytime they call, email. So I didn't have any recollection other than there was some discussion about addressing a media bill. We had got it the day before, and we addressed it the following night. And I'm still adamant about replacing the way the media should be to repeal it, like we're trying to override the veto now, and then come together with the editorial board, the legislative branch, the executive branch, and let's sit down and see if we can't rectify the problem. Let's actually sit down and go through all of the concerns by the legislative branch, the executive branch, and address those with the editorial board and see if we can't work this out. That's the focus for me as an individual, for a representative for my district, and I think that's the focus of some of the other representatives that are in favor of trying to override the veto as well.
I'm good. Liz, do you got anything? Okay. Thank you. Anything else you want to add?
I have one comment.
Okay, go ahead.
The last thing I would like to address is, after the first bill was proposed, there was a memorandum sent out to employees and to the nation in regards to why the principal chief had signed the legislation that night when it was approved. The memorandum basically stated that the principal chief supported what the National Council had approved that night, and now that we have approved a repealer, I am caught in a discussion to figure out what changed when the vote was 7-6, I believe, at that time, and now the vote is 9-5 with the full council present, and why the support is not there to repeal it and replace and to try to work these things out. So that is concerning for me, as far as who's to say that the nine voters that voted yes for the repealer, for the veto override now, what has changed in the confidence level of the 7 that voted the previous time to change it. So.
And just like to remind everyone, some of that package has been cut for time. You can see that in its entirety right now at the Muskogee Media YouTube channel. Everyone have a great week. Stay with MuskogeeMedia.com for all your latest news, updates, and developments at the Muskogee Creek Nation.